It's a tragic moment.
Yeah, well, we try not to do that anymore, and we're picking up me talking about it. So here we go. Let me shut this off and wish everybody around the world a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. The Db2Night show seems to be 24/7 in terms of our audience, which is absolutely fantastic. My name is Martin Hubel. Lifetime champion, IBM Gold consultant since, 1994. I've been at this a very long time. And another good friend of mine, Dave Belke, has also been doing all of that as well. Dave, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Martin.
Great.
It's nice to talk with you.
It is nice. One of the best parts of this job is being able to catch up with good friends before we get underway here. And
yeah.
So let me get the housekeeping out of the way, because I'm not the most important person in the room. Dave is. And here's our social media page, as always. LinkedIn is lightly used, but the Twitter feed seems to be a good way for people to catch up and know about us. And of course, we are now on YouTube replays, so if you don't want to download anything, you can use that. Here's our disclaimers and our copyright information. We are recording. We will make the recording available. I'll ask Dave very nicely to send along a PDF of his slides if you like to follow those and have those for reference. And
oh yeah, I'll provide those after.
And we also respect everyone's trademarks. So there you go. I used to read that through, but I started feeling like I didn't want to do it anymore. All right. Upcoming shows. Today we have Dave. On April the 9th, we're back to an LUW show, and we've got John Hornibrook from the IBM Toronto lab. Actually, the lab's in Markham, about 10 minutes from where I live. And it's Db2 Query Optimization 101. That'll be a refresher for people wanting to hear. John is the absolute guy to talk to with Db2 LUW Query Optimization. He's the guy. And we're having a reprise, or our annual visit, from Piotr Mrzyszewski. He's the executive director of the lab and all of those other wonderful things there. He's a dynamic speaker. He's a great guy. That he always says something that you want to hear, and he's easy to listen to. So please do not miss the May 7th show. On the Z side, which is our audience today, we have Mariella Wyrak, the distinguished engineer on data and AI, along with Kendrick Wren as well, doing a presentation, again, a little bit on the DB2 for ZOS data changes in your enterprise, which will be another development topic that'll be good. And on May 21st, Steen Rasmussen of Broadcom, formerly CA, is going to be talking about implementing schema changes in a different way than using the work list approach of the older products that both Platinum Technology and BMC pioneered back in the 90s. There's new things he's going to be talking about there, so that'll be another great show. I've got some ideas coming in for June, and I'll get around to adding them, but bear with me on that. It used to be I'd add them all in January, but these days, things just take a little longer. The Dbi announcements have been updated a little bit. We have Dbi is our founding sponsor of the Db2Night show. And as such, we will be, as always, you can go to the DBI site and get information. And they also have a special thing going on here in the middle. They're running the latest and greatest web suite of products that they use for tuning DB2. And there's a registration link. And I'll be putting that up on the Db2Night show site so that you will not ever have to type that in. And as always, with DBI, if you want to see their other demo that they have on their site, there's a link there from the DBI homepage to go see the demo down at the bottom of the page. I'm interested myself in seeing that demo on the 22nd, which is that's nearly a month away now, or almost 4 weeks. And our winner for the gift card is Dave Chern of AAA Missouri. I've known David for a very long time. I think the last time I caught up with him, it was in Kansas City or in Overland Park, somewhere around there. Always nice to see Dave at conferences. He's the Amazon gift certificate winner today. That's congratulations. And our just our standard sponsorship page, which is DBI and Martin Hubel Consulting. That's yours truly. And we'll take you from there and just mention, as another public service, that the time change has gone into effect in North America, and it happens this weekend in Europe. So people in the UK, for example, right now are only 4 hours ahead of North America in the time zones here, in Eastern time zone, and Europe's 5 hours. But they'll be fixing that because they're going to jump ahead this weekend. So just keeping that in mind, we'll be back to normal schedule in April. And what else are we going to do for Easter? Or, we always have to have a joke, Clyde. And if I can't come up with a joke, I can make you smile by showing puppies.
There you go. It's either that or kittens.
Kittens, yeah, we could have had a kitten there too, but one of my daughters is a cat person. The other two of them are dog people. So when we get together, there's lots of people and lots of dogs.
There you go.
But what are you going to do with a basket full of baby bullies?
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Now we're into our polling questions. And I had a moment of panic there. I said, do I remember to update these? And the answer is, I actually did.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it and actually get something done. So this is our standard question. Had to break it down a little bit. We can't break it down to what certain function levels down really fine because we only are allowed 5 choices per question. So I said 503 and higher, and version 12, 100 through 502, and then the other things we have. And of course, you're at a DB2 show, so I hope nobody answers the final number down there, because that would be sad. Actually, you might learn something, which would not be sad.
Well, they don't want to use the best database.
That's it. This is a place where DB2 gets a lot of love. And what we say.
Yeah, we got 6% of the people that don't use DB2, so
that's fun. Yeah, we got a fairly big audience today. That's good to see as well. All right, we'll close that and we'll go on to, we've got a bunch of questions. I just put this in for a bit of fun, Dave. Let's see what.
Not a problem.
Yeah. This is our Easter question, because you brought it up in one of your questions and said, I don't care about that Apollo thing. I'm going to retire. So I figured I'd just ask people where people are. And we got a couple of good friends sometimes that dial in. My friend Locke Lyon, who's, I don't know if he's on with us today, but he's off and on. And he's retired. He's in around Lansing, Michigan, as I recall. And but he's. And Peter Backlund shows up from time to time. He's another good old friend from Sweden who spends a lot of time in Spain these days, but it seems it's 50-50, I think, between the two for him. So here we have most people have voted on that. We'll share the results. And what we have a wide range here between 15 and 20 to 25%. But looking at this another way, if you say 5 years or less, 40% of our audience is getting near that magic time, the golden years. Yeah, show me that gold. That's what I'm after. Right now, all I got is silver and hair falling out. All right, the next question is, do you use 32 or 64-bit Java? I flipped this around a little bit and it said one or the other, both, or neither. And you're on a Java presentation. You might be looking at Java, but that's interesting.
Well, they're looking at the DB2 side of it also.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeedy. So we've got some people, let me close that off and I'll share the results there. We've got 53% is 64-bit and we've got 41% using both. And we'll hide that and move on to our next question. Which IDE do people use? And I made this so that people could have more than one choice.
Good.
Unfortunately, with the other, there's no write-in votes with the polling system. You'd have to put it in the comments or some area like that and in the question area. Some people like to do that, but I'll move that tool up here. I'll close that off and share the results. And we see
other. Very interesting. Put in the chat which ones you're using as other.
Yeah, put in the question tool if you can, please. Dave would like to know that. And but we'll move along in the way. IntelliJ is the answer on one of those.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty much an enhanced plain Eclipse type of thing. Yeah.
And we'll move on and do the last one here, which is one of your plans to migrate to the new Apollo, which is, I think it's going to, what number comes after 11, 12? What's the next number? If I was going to put a version number on that, they don't like to put that version number on, but I'm thinking it's going to be a number right after 12.
Yeah, I think so. It's a lot sooner than people think.
Oh, time flies.
Yeah.
I started working for a vendor when just before DB2 version 2.1 came out. I was teaching classes on 1.3 back in 1987. My goodness.
Yeah, I hear you.
You were in there one of those classes early on.
I started DB2 with version 1.2 in 1985. 1984, 1985.
Well, dating myself, I started on 1.1 in 85, but we did not have MVXA. We didn't need it until we got DB2, so we put DB2 on MVS 370, which meant everything had to fit in under the 16 megabyte line.
Yeah.
Very scary stuff.
Well, some people about half our audience will be doing it 2023, so that's good.
Yes. Okay, those are all closed off. We've got our final big question at the end of the thing, which is, did you learn anything? But we aren't going to ask that just yet. And there's people saying, I can remember a time before DB2, and I was there too. I was working for about 10 years prior to DB2 coming out. So such is life.
Yeah.
Dave, it's your turn. I'll turn it over to you and make you the presenter. You should have it pop up now. So, as always,
hi everybody.
I will.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I will monitor the Q&A thing and break in. There is no commercial on our DB2Z shows other than to remind people that DBI is our founding sponsor, and they are happy to do this for the DB2 community.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today. Gonna talk about DB2 Java performance. Let's see if my cursor is gonna work here. There we go. That's me. That's my website. That's what I've been doing for the last 35 years. Started doing DB2 a long time ago, and I work with really big DB2 ZOS systems these days. I did a lot of DB2 North American conferences that are listed here, and also in Europe with Martin, and Australia, and all over the world with DB2 seminars. So it's been a great thing to do. These are the things you're going to learn. We're going to get through this stuff, but the first and most important thing you need to understand is the craziness that goes on with performance stories. There's a story behind every performance problem, and I want to bring this story to you. It's really a story that's been developed through many performance problems that I've done over the years. These stories are all true that I'm talking about. The names and the circumstances have been changed to protect the innocent. I fix these things as a consultant, and after learning about these things from this session, you'll be able to fix them too. So my story begins on Monday morning. I get into the office usually pretty early, around 7:30, and I get online, and all of a sudden, whole bunch of vice presidents get on and team me all at once. Processing has been executing for 2 hours, and they say it's got problems. It should have been done, an hour and a half ago. It shouldn't have been running that long. So the first thing that I always do when I get into these situations is start a log or something in Word that asks who are the developers, what is performance history, when was this supposed to be finished, where was it tested, which is huge, and why did the vice presidents think it's a performance issue? In some of the places that I've worked, performance problems are situation normal, all screwed up. So one of the things that I've learned over the days is start doing screen prints of everything and make sure that you have current access to the production environment so that when they gang up on you on Monday morning, you can get right into production, get into the monitors, look at the monitors that you've always started them, that you always have the correct traces already running on your ZOS, your Linux, or your server environment, and you have the ability to capture the production web logs and application logs, and if necessary, you have the capability to do a dump of the application on the tier 2 server or within the mainframe environment so that you can capture the performance information and the state of the performance problem. You need all this information as background. So when I get into my performance monitor, I look at the craziness that I'm asked to. It says this thing's been running for 2 hours, and I look and I see this in my performance monitor. I see that there's one of these processes running, and the rest, the 7 other ones, are doing nothing. So I'm seeing that they're in my DB2 system, they're in my DBM1 spot, so they've probably been spawned from the application and they're abusing my system. They've done only a minimal 21 million get pages over 2 hours. Usually in some of the systems that we can configure, we do that in 2 or 3 minutes. So the performance of this whole situation is way out of whack. So I do a nice screen print of this and send it off to the vice presidents to let them chew on it and let them understand what the performance problem is and get them off my back. So that brings me into the first thing that I found out about this situation. This situation was caused by a framework that a lot of companies are using. In the Java environments, they're doing frameworks, they're doing notebooks, they're doing all sorts of containers. All of these frameworks can perform efficiently. Some of the earlier Java frameworks like Hibernate and Spring, they're just awful. When I started doing Java in the early 90s, beware of the lightweight frameworks. When we started out doing those things, they were really good for a quick demo of bringing up a website and bringing up a web page, but these lightweight frameworks really can't stand up to the performance. I am a huge believer in getting away from frameworks or web engines or object generators or Spring and Hibernate specifically. Stay away from those, and I got some slides. That situation that I displayed with one of those modules and the 7 doing nothing was caused by a problem with a Java programmer not understanding how Spring Batch works. Spring Batch is a framework that should be avoided like the plague. I really don't like using frameworks because they hide the complexities of a program. The architecture of Spring is a read, process, and write concept. And if you don't do the Spring Batch considerations and the configuration correctly, you will end up with a chunk processing that will lock up all the other sub-processes that the Spring Batch will deploy. Within Spring Batch, you can have one Java process kick off subtasks or sub-processes, and that's why we had the one process working and none of the other processes doing any I/O or anything. The subtasks that the Spring Batch configuration and Java program did kicked off the subtasks, but the subtasks and the program weren't designed for that situation. The other problems we've had with Spring Batch is the memory allocations for the subtask or the main task have been screwed up. So you get memory errors and you get memory problems across the environment. The other aspect is you're also doing all these subtasks in the same DB2 member. So instead of spreading the workload out across different LPARs, you're having all that subtasking, having it all occur in one DB2 subsystem. So that's a real quick thing. The other problem that I've seen over the years is Hibernate. Hibernate is a cache that is put in place for doing persistence, so minimizing the database I/O. One of the things that you can do in Hibernate is you can lazy load things, you can do quick evicts, but you have regular SQL versus Hibernate SQL. A long time ago when I was consulting for a large insurance company, they had a Hibernate that was trying to do Hibernate joins, and they were using separate SQL statements and trying to join that within the Hibernate persistence layer. This is really, really awful, and it should be avoided if at all possible. They also have locking issues within Hibernate because not always is the SQL tuned, so it has issues with taking shared locks, and then when you try to do updates, it causes issues. The other aspect is Hibernate is usually coming from a tier 2 Unix or Linux box, and there's a separate log. I was at a medical client a long time ago where they had a Hibernate framework. They were doing lazy loading of some reference data, and they were referencing that information over and over and over again. But every time they went into garbage collection for the Java server, that reference data and that persistence layer was destroyed and had to be recreated because they were so tight on server memory. So looking into the log, I was seeing that this reference data was being loaded over and over again. At that same client, another application we looked at, we saw that they moved their application quickly from test to QA to production. They forgot to reset debug mode, and they were logging all the methods and all the classes that were being called into this tier 2 server. So really need to look at where you're logging, because logging can dramatically stop your applications. And basically this is one performance. I turned off debug and turned off logging in that one application, and I improved performance by about 35%. The logging, if you have it on and you're displaying some things, it can cause as much as 75% of an overhead for your transactions. So one of the things that I see in Java programs all the time is their configuration that logs way too much information. The other aspect of these frameworks, Spring Framework or Hibernate Framework, is they have configuration files. And those configuration files are not really compatible for a test to a QA to a production environment. So you have repeated tuning efforts and loading these configurations into these different environments. I have hundreds of billions of rows in my production environment, and the configuration that I have there is finely tuned, and it cannot be recreated in a test environment. So you really need to understand how you're going to do incremental deployments. It really complicates the multiple versions of the configuration, and the framework is really a problem and can ruin your application availability, your reliability, and stability because of the memory allocations that are different from your test environments or your QA environments to your production environments. So these frameworks are really, really awful. So the Spring configuration was really the problem here. And basically what had happened is the main application that was doing all the work got locked up with all the other ones. We had one unit of work that was out of control, and it was syncing with those 7 other applications. And again, this is a prime example of what a misconfigured, misguided Java program using a framework can do to your environment. The other aspect of these frameworks is they really bloat up your Java class size and your module size. And when you're synchronizing your application and doing, transactions and units of work, these module sizes can really affect your Java performance in the sense of how much garbage collection you're doing, how often that garbage collection is being done, and how the framework interplays with your memory within the JVM. You want to make sure that the application is as quick and easy as possible, and it doesn't have to sync up with that stupid framework, especially when you're units of work. The other aspect, I was at a large financial firm that shall remain nameless, that they had 3 different versions of the framework within their Java overall application. And some of those parts of that framework couldn't be upgraded in parts of their Java project because the latest edition caused problems within their code. So they had to have an older version of that framework in the class path and the packaging of that application. So really look at how dependent you become on open source or these framework products. I really can't stress enough to get away from those. So when I was able to look into the performance monitor and do that first screen print, I saw that I had real problems, and I called down to applications and started getting them on the line, see who was in as early as I was. And also I called operations and told them to cancel it. Before they canceled it, I grabbed this screen print of what had happened in that one member that had worked. And I saw that this thread history, so gaining a good screen print and good detailed debugging information of what had happened with that application over those 2 hours is vital. You need to make sure that you can have this type of detailed information so you can grab the performance information. And one of the things that you want to look at is when you're going through the Java code, that you understand that you're doing good Java hygiene. And when I first started out doing my Java DB2 performance classes, one of the first things I found, people were very loose with their standards, and they were having Java programs that weren't using parameter markers. That is pretty much a bygone age these days. Most people have the good standards and good Java hygiene in their DB2 Java programs, where they use the correct parameter markers and correct Java types for the DB2 columns. It's still, you find it occasionally. I found one about 6 months ago where they weren't handling money correctly. And now we have the Java money data types. There's no excuse for handling money outside of those data types. The other aspect is in the DB2 land, when you're doing a DB2 program and a Java DAO, a data access object, you want to make sure that there's always SQL code being checked. Frameworks, sometimes those frameworks get into memory errors and they don't even check their own framework for return codes. So you really want to make sure that the SQL code and the Java framework, if you do have to use one, is always taken care of. The other aspect is you need to have all your Java, make sure that they close all the SQL objects. I had a situation about 5 years ago where I was at a client and all the threads were used up within the CICS Liberty configuration that we had in place. What had happened is they implemented a new package of their Java application and they forgot to close the connection. Well, the transactions kept being spawned up, and there was no timeout value within the Liberty configuration, so these threads just hung around. And eventually they blew out the memory within the Liberty CICS, and it was not a pretty testing situation. But also what I find recently is the most critical problem is making sure that the Java processing is thread safe, and make sure that you have some mechanism within your testing so that you can verify that your application is thread safe. With all the cloud deployments that are happening these days, with all the servers that are being spun up, you need to make sure that whenever you're doing good, transactions of updating and deleting or doing anything within your database, that it is thread safe, so you have subroutine integrity. The other aspect is one of the things that I've done for many of the consulting clients that I've done over the years is help the Java programmers set up good testing environments. I work in most of the Java code these days in some of the companies that I work with. They have hundreds of billions of rows. And those complex data situations, if you have a 1 in a million situation and you have 1 billion rows, you have 1,000. If you have 100 billion rows, you have 100,000 unique 1 in a million situations potentially. So you need to get into those data complexities and extract those complex data architecture and situations that you have within your database so that you have those unique situations within your testing environment. One of the other things that I don't really see is end-to-end exercising and performance testing for any fixes. And one of the most funny things is when a new Java programmer comes into the environment and tries to cache the entire database within their test environment. And in some cases, they can cache, enough data in their little Java program. And when they try to do that in the, next bigger QA environment, it blows out their JVM immediately. So they really need to set up a good testing environment with good data. The other aspect is performance needs to be documented and needs to be a priority because there's always time to fix it later. The other aspect is any time that any hash maps, vectors, or arrays are used within a Java environment, I try to focus my attention on how much those tables and those arrays are populated. And that is very, very important when you're doing Java memory analysis, so that you understand how much memory is being soaked up by those various tables that you have. Now, the other thing that I've helped set up with companies is also good CM procedures that drive performance analysis, so that a Java program will come out of the test environment. In the agile environment, they want to move that within hours into the production environment. Well, that's all fine and good, and I'm very good with agile situations, but automating and having automated procedures with a checklist of components that is, things that have been checked for the performance of this Java module, you can automate this stuff and set up JavaScript or Ant scripts that will move things quickly through production and do these automated tests for you. I'm a big proponent of testing tools. There are a lot of tools that are open source, like PMD, which is a static code analyzer, Sonar, which is another great thing that checks for bugs, checks for vulnerabilities, securities, nulls, all sorts of things. And then IntelliJ, which is one of the Eclipse IDEs, but IntelliJ is an Eclipse add-on that you can add into any of the environments. So you really need automated tools to make sure that your Java source is doing good things in the performance area. Automated tools, I'm a huge proponent of those. One of the things that I definitely make sure that has happened is I make sure that I understand what Java modules have the SQL in them. Where is the data access objects? Where are the keys for that? And where is the situations that the database is being referenced? Also, I try to document where in the Java application, where is the updates being done within the application, and where are they in the timing of the transaction. A lot of the Java folks like to recreate the locking that's in the database, and this is completely and totally unnecessary. So you want to make sure that they're not taking extra locks within the database, and you want to make sure that you have DB2 SQL explains for all the SQL, and that you have a good test environment that has all the statistics from production migrated into your test environment. This is very, very crucial. The other aspect of the test data that I'm talking about is the billions of rows. You need to distill that into your unique situations that you have within your database. These unique situations need to be used in your testing environment. One of the things that I ran into issues with is we had test data that had been all brought to the tier 2 server, and we took the production mainframe information that was EBCDIC, and we took the Windows environment that was ASCII, and we all brought it to the server, tier 2 Sun server that was using Unicode. Well, the testing was all done and testing was taken care of, and then the application was deployed to the QA environment where the actual connections to the mainframe and the actual connections to the Windows environment were being done. And we had huge data translation problems with EBCDIC going to Unicode, Sun Unicode going to AT&T Unix, and different versions of ASCII on different versions of Windows machines. So not only did the Java program uncover all this, but we uncovered huge issues between the different platforms of how they were taken care of. This was the first application that was using money, and we had to balance money through all these different code bases of, or codicil bases of the data. So I'm a huge fan of the profiling tools. A lot of these tools are built into Rational Application Developer. Since I work with a lot of IBM shops, they have profiling built in, and you can trace the normal flow of your applications. One of these situations, I found that the application was doing about 60,000 calls to the database that didn't need to be done. They were getting reference data over and over and over and over again. Also uncovered Java classes that were never being used, that were from an old release, and realized how much of the transactions were being cached within the retailer's cart. Even though they said they had nothing in the cart, they were still caching that data. And also discovered looping in a process for order entry, that they were validating the order over and over and over and over again. So you need to make sure that you profile your Java applications so you can understand where things are looping and understand what things are being done within your Java package, your class, and your various methods. And this is where you also uncover all the dead code that is no longer necessary within your environment. So do profiling, do execution time analysis, do memory analysis, do thread analysis, do all these different types, find out where you're spending your time in your various modules, and if any one module is used much more than the other, dive into that and see what the logic is, or see what your test data is driving within those modules. Gather these statistics and make sure that you're doing all this documentation, and carry that documentation as you move from your test environment to your QA. One of the first things that I like to recommend is when you have a Java application that goes berserk in tier 2 or tier 1, that you email all the errors to the developers. They will very, very quickly understand that you're serious about getting these problems fixed, and make sure that they have all the documentation that you request when these errors come up. The other thing that I find all the time is Java programmers saying that they can write a database or do transaction locking better. It's never the case. DB2 is much faster than any application. Application joins with Java, one module grabbing information from one table, and the other Java module grabbing information from another table, and then they're doing a in-memory Java join. Again, that's terrible performance, terrible use of memory within the JVM, and DB2 and the database can do it much, much faster. The other aspect is, garbage collection or memory is huge within the JVM. You need to make sure that when you get cache errors, that you report them, and that you understand what's involved with these various errors. Then the other most important thing is the timing within the application unit of work, where the insert, updates, and deletes in the application happen. You should do all your read activity in the beginning, get everything all set up, and then the insert, updates, and deletes should be done with keys and done instantaneously, and then the application, the Java process, should commit, so that the locks held within the Java application and within the database are at complete and utter minimum. Martin, do we have any questions? I'll take that as a no.
That little unmute button is really small.
Yeah.
No questions so far. Keep going. Sounds great.
Okay, good. All right, so looking at the Java threads in detail, looking at this, you can see that right off the bat, there's huge issues with this. First thing is, what is the dependency with this module that I'm showing that has this type of execution profile? What things are dependent on it? How many forks are there in development and QA? What old releases of the software, what current versions, weekly reports on the application creep, and how does the team report and manage their releases? So when you get into the framework dependencies, the number of versions and everything else is crazy. You want to stay away from these because you always have problems with them. Then one of the things you want to make sure that you understand is where the Java classes are referenced. Is it SQL? Is it using Hibernate? Is it using Spring Batch? The wrong SQL statement in their data, is it something that is being used over and over again, but it doesn't do it efficiently? Some people don't upgrade their reference modules within their Java. They have the reference data that the application needs. There's a lot of performance that can be taken out of those old Java applications that are doing reference data. A lot of the Java applications also don't really have a good database design. I found a lot of Java applications with Java developers designing their databases. They don't really do good partitioning. They don't really do good index structures. They don't really do good index columns. I was at a bank in the South where I had 17 indexes off of the main table, and they had a number of these indexes with one extra column, another extra column, so that the database design was absolutely horrendous, and the index structures, every time they updated that main table, they had to update 17 index structures. And this brought the processing against that one main table just awful. So you need to optimize the number of indexes. You really should have 3 or 4 tops, but I'm a huge fan of only having 1 or 2. So I try to make sure that that is the way that the database. The other aspect is the amount of data that is being processed by one program can be extraordinary. In some of the big data environments that I've been able to design and implement over the years, we've been able to do billions of rows in minutes by spreading out the workload, by using the automatic Java zip processing enablement that is on the mainframe environment, and spread this workload out across not only multiple programs, but multiple partitions, multiple data sharing members, and multiple LPARs to get multiple zips, where I can get 8 to 32 zips working on one process across partitions. And a couple of years ago, I explained how to spread out this. Reference that older presentation or hit me up with some questions, and I'll be happy to give you a copy of it. If you have Hibernate, convert them to native stored procedures. Native stored procedures are zip enabled, and they have a huge performance improvement of over the executed Hibernate SQL. I did this for one client. We saw about a 63% increase in performance by just taking those Hibernate modules out. And they were able to be cached, they were able to be parallelized, they were all good things happened by creating those stored procedures. Also, make sure that you get out of all the cache operations that Hibernate does. If you have any special cache set up within your Hibernate, those would be my first things to attack as a performance problem, because slowly changing data and reference data is a performance nightmare. And again, when you get into this cloud performance, where you have local cache, where you're having multiple servers or multiple cloud instances where you're trying to run things. Cache failover or failover dependencies need to be examined when you're going into your environment. This slide I really like because it has, in the second window here, multiply the numbers out to see how many transactions you have. Make sure there's enough server headroom, and spawn all the server instances or Kubernetes cloud instances that you can. So in this situation, first impressions, the first thing that stuck out for me for this was we had 2 aborts. So data integrity was out the window with this performance situation. That was the first thing I let the vice presidents know. It's like, whatever you're trying to do, it doesn't have any data integrity. Then they had open cursors and closed cursors, and it wasn't even close. Open cursors and closed cursors within a Java program or within any DB2 program should always be equal. You shouldn't have a million or 1.1 million difference. Lock table. Why are they locking a table? Did we get lock escalation? Which tables were locked within the environment? This is unacceptable to the extreme. If you're locking tables or doing Java and you're doing the DB2 lock table, you should have a very good reason for doing that. Also, the number of describes is 3.9 million. Usually within a good performing Java program, you describe a Java SQL statement once and use it 1 million times. So why or how is this being done, or why is this being done? So this situation of the describes really indicates to me that there's no looping control or no looping understanding of when the describe is being done and what is happening with it. Also, the prepares, they're doing 3.4 million prepares. How about some thread reuse? Again, how many times are you preparing? You should be opening a cursor and doing the fetch. Are you preparing every single fetch that's happening? So one of the things that you really look at is just bad DB2 work, but then we also have bad looping, it seems like, going on within this process. So we look at this, open cursors, lock table, describes, prepares, the number of aborts, the aborts just, blew my mind. So within these situations, it's usually a looping or a logic problem. I was at a loan company in the upper Midwest where they didn't understand where their looping was or their performance was. They got a bad looping problem. We fixed the loop, reduced the calls by 99%. Slow response time, usually it's a wrong looping within the application, and the web pages even show the correct data, but understand where the Java classes and where they're being called. Where do the services connect? I had one situation where I was working with a cloud client where they were connecting to one cloud to do the authentication and the security authorization. And then that transaction was going through two different Unix servers. And then it was coming to the database and then going to another. Once it went to the database, it went to another server. So where is the cache or where is the transaction going within your application? So you want to make sure that you have a network, what cache or what servers does your transaction land on? The other aspect is where are you in your application? I did one performance analysis where they were going, when I searched the transaction and the Java application, they were referencing a DB2 LUW database that was then transferring to a DB2 ZOS environment and then going into an Oracle database, and they were trying to do all of this in sub-second, and they were trying to do this in one transaction. The problem was they didn't understand what was going on with this transaction. They thought that they could build up inbound and outbound queues and separate this stuff off of different layers. All they did is increase the wait time between the various platforms and between the various servers. The way to get performance is through natural Java, not using any framework, using parallelism, and understanding where your transactions and your looping go. Do this in one connection. There's no reason that a Java transaction should have more than one connection going on, because DB2 will spawn and do parallelism for you, and it'll take care of all those issues. There's a lot of bad habits that are out there with the Java applications. One way, the best way to clean that up is to communicate and get the automation of the tools and the data. Get the data, get the complexity of the data that I talked about earlier, and get that stuff into your test environment and understand the round trips or the platforms or the databases that you're going to be touching to do your unit of work. So in summary, avoid any and all Java frameworks. That is especially for Spring, especially for Hibernate. There's some other ones that were out there. Ruby on Rails was popular years ago. Stay away from them all. Understand where your packages only have one version. Minimize the number of open source packages. One of the other speeches and one of the other consulting things that I do is security audits for databases, for applications, and there are huge liabilities in open source packages on security. So if you're using any open source within your Java applications, you really need to take a look at the NIST's database for security. There are current vulnerabilities open against Hibernate, Spring, and a number of open source package. Understand your usage of the JVM, do your memory cache, use the IDE profiling, debug modes, and understand your garbage collection. When your Java application in your JVM is really performing at peak, how many garbage collections are you doing? Garbage collection used to be a huge problem, but with the improvements in the latest and greatest versions of Java, it's become manageable. Test your Java processing and make sure your thread's safe. And if you're doing cloud applications, make sure that your failover is a clean, precise cutover, and that will help your scalability and access to your database. For the DB2 side, fully understand your connection usage. Make sure that you understand your unit of work and the logic loop that you're going to be going. Understand where your locks are being taken and where they're acquired and where they're cleaned up. Closing all the DB2 objects is huge, and make sure that you clean up all your resources, the SQL statements, the result sets, the connections. Make sure that there's SQL checking and SQL handling immediately after the SQL is executed. Make sure that you know your Java modules or Java classes and that you have good explains. Make sure everybody's using parameter markers, and make sure you're using money for money in the Java classes. Make sure you got the right columns. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate your time today. And as I said, follow me on Twitter at dbelke, or hit me up on LinkedIn, or send me any questions at there's spaces purposely put into that, so when the Google screen scrapers and they scrape my PDF that I'm going to give you, that it doesn't grab my email address. But take the spaces out of that, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much for your time today, and email me any questions. Thank you. Martin?
Thanks, Dave. That was great. A lot of good information there. And I've got one question in here for you. The first question is that I can answer for them. This webinar will be available for replay. There will be a handout that you can download to entice people to come. They can also, your developers can also watch this on the Db2Night Show YouTube channel. But here's a question for you, Dave. What if the DBA is not being heard by the developer, and worse, not by the manager of the developers?
What if management? Well, that is always a difficult situation. When I get into these situations and these discussions with management, it's like, I can fix this stuff now while it's in test, or we can all panic when it's in production. One of the things that's great to do to get management's attention is to trial the Sonar or PMD or the IntelliJ system, and just provide them with a report of all the bugs that these automated products find in their Java code. Then it's not you, it's the product that is giving management that information. That's why I'm a huge fan of putting in, standardized JUnit testing, and these testing tools make profiling your application before it goes to production, an automated process through your agile process. I mean, in the rad screen prints that I did, you can see it's all built into the IDE, and it's a very point and click type of thing to get those reports out. So that's the best way that I've seen to automate that and get management's attention.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Good things to do. Let them look at the tool and say, how do you want to make? How would you like this tool to provide you? Would you like to see bad numbers, or would you like to see good numbers?
Yeah,
and let them go back. That's a really good answer. Good. All right. I'm going to take back control. And
thank you.
Thank you. And let me just do the show my screen here, and we'll move forward to show our ending screen. But our big thing before we go is to get the last question up here, which is, did you learn anything today?
I learned that my voice gets really crackly about 40 minutes in.
Oh, yes. And we've got a really good response there, so I'm going to close that off and share that. 100% of our audience learned something today. That's awesome. We always like to see that. I wish I had a noisemaker, but actually it's in the other room on a trombone stand. So you probably don't want to hear that right now. But having said that, that's absolutely fantastic. That's what we like to see. And like to thank everyone for coming. We had a good sized audience today. And Dave will be touching base later on today to exchange files. And let me cue the music and wish everyone a great weekend. Stay safe with all the things going on in our world today. And we will see you 2 weeks later on the Db2Night show. Happy Passover, happy Easter, enjoy, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks again, Dave. Great job. See you all.
Thank you.
Right,
Take
bye-bye.
care.